30 years is a very long period of time. 1st December 1993, I was in college. I actually not even started working and not even got my first job. But here I'm doing a very special conversation to celebrate 30 years of two flagship funds from Franklin Templeton. To be honest, they're actually flagship funds for the industry itself. Franklin India Bluechip Fund and Franklin India Prima Fund completed 30 years since inception on the 1st of December 2023. Thank you for watching a very special conversation today with Avi Satwalekar, President of Franklin Templeton India. Avi, how did it feel to be part of this really momentous occasion, right? 30 years of two flagship funds for Franklin Templeton.
So 30 years is a long time.
Right.
It's a truly memorable journey, right? And if you look at it, we're one of the few fund houses in the industry that can say that we have a 30-year-old fund, not just one, but two 30-year-old funds. What it has also proven is that equities have been the best way to create long-term wealth.
Right.
And that's primarily driven by the power of compounding.
Right.
Which is a very simple concept to understand, but very difficult to adhere to, right? And this compounding has occurred in spite of a number of different changes, whether it is economic turmoil, global financial crises, pandemic, election, regime changes, wars.
Right.
Through all of that, you've been able to create wealth,
Right.
and that is driven by compounding and staying invested for a long period of time. So it is truly a very memorable journey, and it is something that we are very proud of.
So, Avi, I've read somewhere that actually, you've been a fund manager at the beginning part of your career. I read somewhere that, even companies don't survive for 30 years, right? And here you've got two funds which have survived for 30 years. Tell me what, according to you, are perhaps the key ingredients of a fund, really generating wealth for such a long period of time.
So when you think about what is a fund is a collection of companies that you've invested in, right? So if you're saying companies don't last 30 years and a fund lasts 30 years, it's got to have some ability to weed out those companies, right?
Right.
So let's start with, what we've got is, the way we look at it is the 3 Ps, right? Philosophy, people, and process. So what is our philosophy? Our philosophy is very long-term investing. That is why we can end up having that wealth creation over 30 years, because our focus on investing is long-term. When you think about people, right? We have long tenured investment folks, right? They started with us as analysts, then became portfolio managers, and then have stayed on and been long-term portfolio managers for us. So that long tenure helps them to understand and follow that philosophy. And finally, process, right? There's no point having the right people or the philosophy if you don't have a repeatable process that's adhered to. Now, when we talked about people, there are changes to people as well. If you don't have the right philosophy, the right process, when you make changes to people, you're going to have a disruption. And that is something we've not seen.
Right.
So in those 30 years, have we had changes in people in the funds? Of course we've had.
Right.
But has there been a disruption? Not at all.
Right.
So those 3 Ps are critical.
And I think that's perhaps what's actually helped these two funds stay true to label, right? And one of the things that we've heard from investors, distribution partners over many, many years is the fact that these two funds have really been true to label. And I guess all of these 3 Ps that you spoke about are critical in making sure that that path is followed, right? So Avi, if I look at the industry, when FT started here in India, FT was an early entrant. Obviously now the list of asset management companies is significantly larger. How did investors perceive investment at that point in time versus what they perceive investment to be now?
So it's not just how did investors perceive investments. I think why don't we take a look back and say how has the industry also evolved, right? Since 1993.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, in 1993 there were about 9 fund houses maybe. Today there are over 40.
Correct.
The industry size was 47,000 crores. Today it's 47 lakh crores, right? So you've seen a 100x growth in the industry also over that period of time. If you're talking about kind of awareness, investor knowledge base, that has also increased over the last 30 years. The acceptance of, let's say, equity funds is far more prevalent now than it used to be. So I think that understanding the appreciation that equities are probably the best asset class to drive or maintain your purchasing power is a huge factor.
And that you think is a real differentiator in the way the industry and
Absolutely.
people have actually, investors have really
Absolutely.
evolved over this long time.
Absolutely, and I think one other point that should be highlighted is the fact that our regulator, Sebi, has been extremely instrumental in increasing investor confidence in the capital markets.
Correct.
And that has indirectly and directly led to a much more sustained, longer period of growth for the mutual fund industry.
But if you look at, and I think I completely agree with the role of the regulator in giving that confidence to the investor community that here is is the industry with very, very strong guardrails. But if you also look at the market situation, right? So think about a time, maybe 20, 30 years back, where investors were getting like 10, 11, 12% of a short return, right? But today, obviously, that's not happening at all. And also with inflation, at a high, investors now realize that, well, you need that money to be actively managed, right? So would you also agree that, well, the situation now has also prompted investors to look at managing money actively, and that's really become a big change?
So it's not so much managing money actively. I think there's a much higher level of understanding and appreciation that financial assets can create and have proven to create
long-term
wealth. Right. And so I think that understanding has led to a higher level of participation. And that will continue. I don't think it's so much as active management of your portfolio. You don't, in fact, we've talked about that, but you don't want active.
Right.
You want to be invested. You have a systematic approach to doing it, and then you stay invested. You do not kind of hop in and out.
I'm going to shift focus, Avi, a little bit to Franklin Templeton as a business.
Sure.
27 years in India, a lot of firsts associated. And today, concepts which are very, very well understood in the industry, both by distributors and investors, were first introduced by Franklin Templeton. You want to just talk a little bit about those for our viewers?
So, the one that I will highlight is something especially that has gotten a lot of attention lately, is the whole idea of systematic investment plans.
Right.
Or SIPs as they're
Right.
fondly called.
Right.
Now, I don't know how many people realize this, but Franklin Templeton introduced SIPs to India. Right? Now, the whole concept of an SIP is to do it, as the word suggests, systematically. Right? And why are we doing that? It is so that as investors, we are prone to emotional swings. So when the markets go up, we're all excited. When the markets go down, we're all depressed. That emotional factor should not be a decision-making point.
Correct.
Right? So a systematic investment plan allows us to benefit from, or not so much benefit, avoid the pitfalls.
Cutting the emotion out of investing.
Cutting the emotion out, where you do not have greed on one side,
Right.
where you start putting in more money as the market goes up,
Right.
or you start pulling out money when the market's going down, which is fear.
Right.
Right? So you have that ability.
Right.
So SIPs definitely, some of the other introductions, obviously, just to mention a few, is the idea of, daily NAVs.
Right.
That's a concept that we take for granted today. That was introduced by Franklin Templeton, right?
Yeah.
Or if you look at your monthly fact sheets,
Right.
that was introduced by Franklin Templeton.
Right.
So there's a number of these firsts that, and when you think back over 30 years, and in our case over 27 years of being in the industry, the contribution has been fairly large.
No, absolutely. I completely agree. So now, Avi, we've spoken about the funds, we've spoken about Franklin Templeton. We're going to shift the focus now to you, as the president of the business. Now, you run Vietnam, you run Malaysia. running India is a slightly, I would say, in the most polite manner, if I would say, slightly different, right, from Vietnam and Malaysia. So first, I think it's been now, 18 months since you've taken over the India business. Describe this experience to us in maybe 100 words. Go for it.
100 words is a lot.
Go for it.
So it's definitely different, right? I would say India, the scale is very different. Not just in terms of just sheer population and the sheer size of our industry, but also the scale that we have, right? As a business. Vietnam for us was a much smaller operation. It was a startup, it was a joint venture. But India, in my mind, the economic opportunity is immense and very well understood, so I don't think that's something anybody is going to question. But the fact that you've got a large population that has so far not invested in mutual funds. So that latent demand that we have is really large, and that's what's exciting.
Right. So Avi, everybody has short-term, medium-term, long-term goals. I think the short-term period for you is over, right? 18 months is now. Tell us, how do you see the next maybe 24 to 36 months and maybe the next 60 months going forward?
So I think the strategy does not necessarily change dramatically, right? I mean, I talked about us being long-term, right? I mean, even as an investor, I've been a long-term investor. So when you're putting in a strategy, it is not a 90-day strategy or a 52-week strategy, right? It is a strategy that's going to be evolving, and just because you've put a strategy in place doesn't mean it has worked exactly to that timeline, right? So what are the three big pillars for our strategy, right? Number one is re-engagement, right? Because we had to get out and meet with our partners again, re-engage with our investors as well, and kind of get the Franklin name back into the industry and the system. The second pillar is obviously on the investment side. Now, when I talk about investing, what are we talking about? We're talking about investing in our brand, we're talking about investing in our people, we're talking about investing in actual assets. And then lastly, it's products. So the three pillars are re-engagement with our partners and stakeholders, investment in the brand and people, and products, and launching the right kind of products, right? So you'll never hear us trying to launch multiple products, right? It's more about finding what is the right product for a particular investor's need.
So, Avi, when Bharat Darshan was on, and it's still on, right? I think you've done a few thousand kilometers, and crisscrossed the country. And you met so many distributors, so many investors. Give the viewer an interesting anecdote that really stuck with you in one of those meetings.
That really stuck with me. So one of the practices that we've had right throughout all these trips is to bring in our oldest investor in the fund.
In that city?
That city. Yeah. And so we've had, I think the shortest period we've had is 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. And when you think about it, especially in today's context, when we can barely sit through a 3-minute long video because we want to cut it short to an Instagram reel length, which is 30 seconds. 10 years is a really long time. And one of the investors that we met with had been invested for like 26, 27 years.
Wow.
So when you think about that, it's like, how do you manage to stay invested in that? Right. So now, of course, I was hoping for some, financial strategy and this. Quite honestly, it was a very simple thing that the investor forgot about the fact that they had an investment.
Correct.
Now, forgetting about having an investment has resulted in a really large wealth creation moment for them.
Right.
And so that really proves the whole thesis that you don't need to get in and out of the market. You need to stay invested in the market, and that time is what's important.
I think creating wealth is a boring process in that sense.
Absolutely.
And the more the boredom, the more likely that you're potentially going to create wealth.
You should not get excited when you're looking at your portfolio.
Correct.
Your portfolio,
there are other sources of adrenaline rush
exactly.
you should try and get
Go
to.
play some sports.
Yeah.
Go find a hobby.
Yeah. Go watch a cricket match.
Skydiving. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So, Avi, this whole conversation is about longevity.
Yep.
Right. Franklin Templeton, 75 years. Franklin Templeton, India, 27 years. Franklin India, Bluechip and Prima, 30 years. Right. A lot of foreign fund houses have come to India, right, stayed for a few years and for whatever reasons decided to kind of essentially move back, okay, from India. But Franklin Templeton came in very early, right, and has a thriving business here, right, between investors, distributors and a tremendous amount of respect for the brand itself. What's the core of Franklin Templeton that connects it, to India, to the longevity, to investors, distributors?
So I would say if there's one thing, and this is very core to our value system, right, is always putting the clients first.
Correct.
And that is something that has come right from the founders, and it continues even with our CEO Jenny Johnson today, where it is always about putting the client first.
Right.
If you constantly are putting the client first, no decision you make is ever going to hurt you.
Yeah. You can't make a wrong decision.
You can't make a wrong decision
by keeping the client first.
by keeping the client. Absolutely. So I think that's something that we've done historically. You pointed out the fact that we're one of the few or the last surviving foreign fund houses, but we're also one of the first foreign fund houses to come into it. Right. So I think there is an advantage to being early.
Correct.
There is an advantage to coming in and being part of the initial growth phase in any market.
Right.
And that has really helped us.
Right.
It is truly, when you think about it, in the early 90s when we did come to India and invested, that was really visionary, right? Because India was just opening up its mutual fund industry.
Right.
And our ability to come in and stay invested, right? It's not like we've not had our ups and downs. We've had them, but we've stuck to it.
Right.
Right? And it kind of goes back to that whole investment philosophy is don't go in and out of markets. You stay invested in the market. And that's what
it's quite amazing that obviously we always talk about staying invested in your business. But Franklin also stayed invested in the industry. So look at the Franklin Templeton Academy, right?
Absolutely.
I remember when I started my career in the asset management industry, the one thing that distributors would tell me is that go and try and attend a FTA session because you probably learn something from the industry, and that effort continues, right? So I'm going to go back to it, right? Not too many businesses really think, okay, about investing in the industry, right? So maybe spend a little time of what's the global philosophy? You've probably spent some time with the Johnsons, I know that. What's it that goes in their mind when it comes to starting a business in a new country and then staying there for years?
So I think it is that ability to think long term.
Correct. Yeah.
That ability to not worry about next quarter, but you're worrying about the next decade.
Right.
You're talking about generational shifts, right? India is a perfect example. Vietnam is another example, right? Where we've been there. When I went in, we had just started in the sense that the country had just started mutual funds, right? We were one of the first mutual funds to be launched there. The idea that you're willing to go in. So what did we do? And this is exactly what we did even in India, right?
Yeah.
You have to educate people on first what a mutual fund is. And who better to educate other than your distributors. So you have to first create that. And so to your point about the Franklin Templeton Academy, why is that valuable? It's because it imparted knowledge. It helped create a distribution force that understood what a mutual fund is or taught them what a mutual fund is. And that investment, you're right, very few people make because there are no immediate rewards. I teach you today does not mean you're going to sell something tomorrow and help contribute to my bottom line.
Right. So, Avi, I've got two final questions in this conversation. First one's a little serious one. And
I thought they were all serious. So.
yeah, they're all serious, but the last one is definitely not serious. It's all about you, right? So 30 years for the two funds, right? What's your message to investors at large, right? Investors not just who are investing with Franklin Templeton, but who are investing in the mutual fund industry over here.
I've always been asked, like, okay, is this the right time to come into the market? Should I put money into the market right now? And my point has always been that the best time to come into the markets is right now.
Right.
It's immaterial.
Every time is a good time.
Every time is a good time, right? And the reason for that is you're never going to find that perfect moment.
Correct.
Right? Because the circumstances are never going to create it. If the markets are falling, I mean, we all know that, right? When the markets are going down, you should be investing more. How many people actually have the emotional fortitude to do that?
Right.
You don't.
Right.
So you might as well start. If the market goes down, you add more, right? So my message to people is that, okay, you know what, if you haven't been invested in the Franklin India Prima fund as well as the Franklin India Bluechip fund for the last 30 years, and the odds are there's quite a few that haven't, you've not lost out.
Right.
30 years are still there. We're not going anywhere. The fund's not going anywhere. The strategy is the same. I would say that just because you have not had that wealth creation in the past does not mean you can't do it in the future. Right? So that ability to create wealth is a very simple formula to understand, but a very difficult formula to implement.
Right.
So the sooner you get to understanding that, time and compounding.
Right.
That's it.
So Avi, I started my introduction. I said 1st December 1993, I was in college. I'm quite sure you were also in college at that point.
Yep.
Right. So let's go 30 years from now. Where do you see yourself 30 years from now, ideally?
30 years from now,
Yeah. Where do you see yourself?
hopefully I'm sitting on a beach somewhere.
Which country?
enjoying. Multiple. Why do
Right.
I have to pick one? I mean, I've had the benefit of living
You like
in
to
4 or
celebrate
5.
summers in various parts of the world.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's the beauty of being able to invest, right? I'd still like to be investing 30 years from now.
Right.
Because there's no timeline on that, right? And I almost say that investing is kind of like wine, right? It just gets better with age.
No, absolutely.
Right? So it's a much. I would be investing, enjoying my time on a beach, hopefully. 30 years from now, God, I hope I can actually walk.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have it from Mr. Ravi Satwalekar that 30 years from now, he will probably be at a beach. I'm not sure where I am going to be. But one thing's for sure, that there'll always be an opportunity to create some long-term wealth. To close this conversation, I want to wish Franklin India Bluechip Fund and Franklin India Prima Fund a very, very happy birthday and years to the next 30 years. Thank you so much.
Happy 30 years to Franklin India Bluechip as well as Franklin India Prima Fund. And I look forward to seeing this 30 years from now.
Action?
That's what this means.
Oh, no. He's doing... And just let me know.
Is my jacket okay? Crease okay?
Yeah. And...
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.